Today we're going to talk about anemia. And anemia is a very common condition in which there is a reduced number of red blood cells in the body, in the bloodstream, and or a reduced amount of hemoglobin. And you know from anatomy that hemoglobin is found within the red blood cells, so these two go together. And so there are many different types of anemia. Many types, in fact, all of the types revolve around a question of why. Why are there too many, or excuse me, why is there a reduced amount of red blood cells, and why is there a reduced amount of hemoglobin in the body? And if you can answer the question of why, then you can then just place a label on each and then be able to assess more detailed and treat from there. So let's go ahead and explore the why. Let's think about that question. Why would there be a reduced amount of red blood cells and or hemoglobin in the bloodstream? Where would they go? Well, the first would be obviously the body lost it somehow. So blood loss would be the first reason. If the body is bleeding somewhere, then of course the red blood cells are going to go with it. So blood loss. Number two, we really have to start digging now. Where else would the red blood cells go? Why would there be a reduced level? And the next answer would be that the body's just not producing them. The body's just not producing these cells, or what it does produce is not functioning properly. Not functioning. And so the level of red blood cells then is going to be reduced as a result. This doesn't need to take, unlike blood loss, the number two might happen over time. It might not be as obvious of a reason. So number three would be there's some kind of death or destruction. And so if there's death and destruction of those red blood cells, then that would naturally reduce the level in the bloodstream of both the red blood cells and the hemoglobin. So 1, 2, 3, blood loss, not producing or not functioning properly, and death and destruction. Now if we break these things out, then we'll really get into being able to label the different types of anemia and then really get down into the details of each. So let's go ahead and do that. And try and scroll down here. And so let's go ahead and break it out. I find the easiest way to remember these things is to try and put it in some kind of visual, some kind of table. So I'm going to take a stab at this. So the types, based on these three things that we talked about above, and the first is blood loss. And so breaking this out further, let's just think about this. How would the body lose blood? Well, number one would be injury. That could be a rapid loss of blood. It could be a slow reduction in blood, and it could be internal or external. And so another reason might be menses, a common reason, very heavy menses. So these are some of the reasons why the body would lose blood. They're pretty obvious. But next we start getting into why the blood cells are not produced in high enough quantities. There's not enough, and they're not functioning. So if we really start looking into this, how do we answer that question? You always want to ask why, because if you can ask why, then you can make the linkages between these pieces of information and make you remember them a whole lot easier. So why would the body not have enough? Well, perhaps it doesn't have what it needs to make them. So what does the body need to make blood cells, red blood cells? First, it needs iron. The next thing it needs is it needs B12 in order to get that iron into the body. What else does it need? Folate. Folate helps with the reproduction of blood cells. 4, you need to make sure that the red blood cell producing center is functioning correctly. Your bone marrow And next, this one is not quite as common, but we're going to talk about it anyway, is the hormones. There are certain hormones that have something to do with regulating blood production, so hormones. Okay, so now we have 5 things specifically that we need to build a red blood cell. Now, obviously, we need protein, we need the basic building blocks of cells, but to make a red blood cell, specifically a red blood cell, you need iron, B12 to carry that iron, folate, a place to produce the red blood cell, bone marrow, and then hormones to regulate the production. So let's break this out a little bit further here. And we're gonna just explore this a little bit more. So let's draw a line down here. And so once you know these things, then it becomes easy to remember what the types of anemia are. So if you don't have enough iron, then it's iron deficiency anemia. And if you don't have enough B12, that's got its own label too. Its label is called pernicious anemia. So, like I said, we just go ahead and we start putting labels on these things. If you don't have enough folate, then it's folate deficiency anemia. Deficiency. And what about if your bone marrow isn't producing the blood cells in the right way? Well, this is a general term for this would be aplastic. Now, there are different types of aplastic, but we're not going to go into those in specificity right now. And then, of course, your hormones have different labels as well based on the cause. But just an example of one would be some sort of disruption in the erythropoietin. And you get points for being able to spell this right, too, because I have trouble with it, poietin. Okay, so that's just an example of this type. There's many other types that you could have, but we're not going to discuss them here. So again, here you have your different reasons why those blood cells aren't being produced. And then you have here the names, the labels. And so that's an easy way to remember what those are. And last but not least, we have our death and destruction. And so the death and destruction, why would that happen in the body? Why would the body be breaking down its own blood cells or some force breaking down its blood cells? And I kind of gave you a clue there. There's a couple of reasons. One would be the body is just attacking itself. And one general term would be hemolytic. Some of your hemolytics and attacking itself, of course, that would be autoimmune. So some of your autoimmune diseases would cause some hemolytic anemia to occur. So why else would the body want to attack its own blood cells? Well, what if the body didn't like the shape or the functionality of that red blood cell? What if the red blood cell looked like this as opposed to this? This is your normal red blood cell, looks kind of like a donut, and this is a sickle shape, and that would be another type of anemia, is the sickle cell anemia, and the body sees this as a non-functioning cell, and so it will destroy it through cytosis. And so that is another reason why you would have death and destruction. So if you look at what we've gone over, our blood loss, our not enough and not functioning, and then our death and destruction, now you can see the different types of anemia and have a better understanding of labeling and assessing and treatment of each.